I'd like to do is really kind of keep this very interactive. I want to talk and talk about what you want to talk about, and I'll certainly talk about anything you want to talk about. But as he mentioned, kind of my focus would be to talk to you about analytics a little bit, our program, some career advice, and then whatever else you want to throw at me. So everything's fair game. He mentioned that you actually have read the article I wrote. That's good to hear someone's reading it, right? So, but you know, so this whole area of analytics, based on what you, let me backtrack as well. I think it's important for me to talk about, you know, our relationship with the University of Tampa. So right now we've got 2 of your alums in our program, really good students. One is actually probably going to get a job here in the next 2 weeks. He's been interviewing up in New York and has done really well for himself. The second one is just starting his first year, and I think he'll be exceptional as well. I will also tell you that we have a partnership with the Lightning, and one of your alums, Erin Bailey, works full-time down at the Lightning. I've been really impressed with her and what she's done. And then about 3 or 4 months ago, one of the Lightning guys who works in analytics called me up and said, hey, I need some help. I need some people to come help me break down video, keep stats, chart video. Do you have anyone from your program that can come help us? And we've got 10 or 12 people working down there full-time with residencies, but I didn't have anyone else I could provide to them. But I know the training that the students get out of this program, so I talked to Dr. Jisha. He got me some names. I put my contact in touch with him, and now 2 or 3 of them are working down there getting paid to log and watch hockey statistics, right? So pretty cool to get paid to do that. I was just down there today, actually, in our lab, and I saw those guys down there working. So that's worked out real well. So I think, you know, these 2 programs can really benefit from one another, so I think that's a good segue into my initial remarks here. So if you once you get that pulled up, we'll start with that. But who can kind of give me and there's no right or wrong answers. Well, there's probably are. When you hear the term analytics, what do you think about? What comes to mind? What's something that resonates with you when you hear the term analytics?
Moneyball.
Moneyball? What's Moneyball mean? The movie, right? But how did they use analytics in the movie? Yeah, and once you answer, I'm going to keep coming after you, so you better be ready.
Oh no, I shouldn't have said anything. They like took the players' stats and they try to create a better team.
Yeah, so the idea of and that's really where most people's first introduction to analytics came about, was the Moneyball. Actually, Michael Lewis wrote a book back in 2003 based on Moneyball, and then the movie came out 3 or 4 years ago. And so if you think about it, it's really not a new concept, but it's something that hasn't been studied and developed as much in detail as some other topics that we talk about in sport business. So I teach a class actually right now. I have it on Thursday mornings. It goes for 4 hours. Starts at 8:30 in the morning. You can't think of anything more exciting to do at 8:30 in the morning to come sit in class for 3.5 hours, right? And so our focus in that class is really not at all on the player side. We do one little fantasy hockey assignment as part of the class where each team is given the salary cap of the NHL, and then they have to work off of building a roster with forwards and centers and goalies and so forth. And it's kind of cool that you figure out how to allocate your resources based on player salaries. And that's kind of the whole idea with Moneyball is about. But 95% of the class is not focused at all on the player side, because the jobs aren't there. Right? We focus on the business side of how we can use analytics to think about things with ticketing, CRM, ROI, those types of stuff. And that's really the focus of our class. So I'll kind of segue into a little bit about what I teach in the class, some concepts about analytics, and then we'll move on from there. But I think a lot of you probably don't think about it, but who can give me a working definition? If I was forcing you to write down a definition of analytics, and how many people in here? 30? Right? So my sense would be that if I asked you to write a definition, we would get probably 25 different answers. So who can give me a working definition of what you think analytics might look like? Can you plug this in for me? I just go on the side. Anybody? Take a stab. How would you define it? Yep.
Like the study of information to make decisions.
Perfect, right? I mean, it's nothing more than that. People try to complicate it in its simplest form. It's taking data, typically existing data, and using that to make informed decisions. So as I go through some of this, I think it'll help kind of bring some things to clarity. So, you know, if you think about the casino right here in town, how many of you have been to Hard Rock? Maybe you don't want to put your hand up in front of your professor, but you know, we have 3 or 4. We have one of our alums working there full time. We have 2 other students working there right now. They probably do analytics as good as anybody, right? Because think about what is the casino trying to do? They're trying to get you in there, spend your money, and they want you to stay in there for a long period of time. Well, how do they know how long you're in there? Well, they track all that stuff, right? That's why they give you one of those player cards. You sit down at a table or a slot machine. They know exactly when you stopped and when you started. They know how much you played for. So knowing that information, that can help them market back to you to get you back in their building. So if you think about it, you know, probably all of us in this room have bought something on Amazon in the last 6 months or a year. And think about what Amazon does. They're like the kings of this, gathering information from you on what you purchased. I go buy a book from Amazon, and 2 days later I get an email saying, hey, we thought you might be interested in these books, right? Reselling me again or something else. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but if all of us went to a web page that I gave you an address, we would all see different ads on the web page, right? You understand that not everybody's going to see the same thing, because that's called like search engine optimization, where these companies are going to target you based on your interest that you've shown in the past. If I go onto Amazon and I'm doing a search for an exercise bike, and I put it in there, I look at 5 exercise bikes, but I don't buy one, 2 days later I'll get something from Amazon saying, hey, here's a little exercise bike you might be interested in, right? They're targeting me. That's using data. They know that I used their website, coming back to me to try to buy something. So e-commerce, Amazon, they do it about as good as anybody. So when we talk about analytics, there's 3 different types, and as I explain each of those to you, I outline these in that article that you read, but you can think about each one as kind of a different layer than the other one, with descriptive being kind of the most basic. So one of my career pieces of advice to you would be this, is you need to read. Okay, you're like, okay, I get that, I'm a college student. But you need to be reading stuff that's relevant to what you want to do. How many of you read the Sports Business Journal? 1 person? 2 people? I mean, that should be an automatic. And Dr. Jisha can tell you how to get that publication. You know, you should be sharing it with your classmates. But that in there and by itself should be one automatic thing you should be reading every week. Right? I mean, it's just good to get a scope of the industry, what's happening. It's also good because you start seeing content, you start seeing things about jobs, what jobs are out there, what people are looking for. But you got to read. So if you think about descriptive analytics, right? This is kind of the idea that you gather and organize data. So if you pull up the newspaper in the morning, and when I was sitting in your chair not too long ago, and I get the newspaper, I would just thumb through and grab the sports section. Right? That's what probably a lot of you do. You don't even know there's other sections in the paper. Local section, business. But you need to read the business section. You need to be aware of what's going on in the business world, because what happens in the business world directly affects what happens in the sport management world. And those 2 are linked. So if I pick up the sports section and I look at the standings of what teams are doing what in the NBA or the NHL, that's just descriptive. It's just reporting. Right? It doesn't give me really any insights. If I pull up the business section, I look at the stock market, same idea. I see what a stock did yesterday. Doesn't tell me what it's going to do tomorrow. Right? If I was good enough to tell you what the stock market was going to do tomorrow, I wouldn't be standing here. Right? I would be teaching this on a boat somewhere. And Dr. just would be, hey, he's in Key West fishing. I'd Skype in with you. The idea is nobody can predict that, right? So that gets back to getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. But so the next type of analytics is called predictive. And this is the idea that trying to use information we have today to predict what's going to happen going forward. Think about the value you would all have if you could go to a company and you could tell them what their headlines were going to look like tomorrow. If I knew what the newspaper was going to say tomorrow, tonight, think of the value of that, right? So analytics, gathering data, trying to predict what's going to happen in the future is kind of the second step here. Now, I think all of you understand this idea that no matter how strong our data is and no matter how strong our inferences that we make, just because there's a correlation between two things, it doesn't mean it's causal, right? It doesn't automatically, just because two things are highly correlated, we can't say that this absolutely causes this to happen. There's other things going on that statistics don't let us make that inference. And again, as we're going through this, any questions that you want to ask, feel free to do it. So probably the most detailed, high level of analytics that companies use is called prescriptive analytics. And this is where you as a consumer or you as a student can go out in the real world and make a huge difference to companies. I can tell you in the 2.5 years I've been in South Florida, we've probably had 10 or 12 of our students interviewing for analytics jobs. And that's where there's a lot of jobs right now. If you have a skill set to be able to go to a company, go to a sport business, whatever it looks like, help them make decisions that, one, is going to help them save money or generate revenue, you got a huge asset to them. So this idea of prescriptive analytics actually talks about a course of action. It's easy if you go into a sporting event and you see a bunch of empty seats to say, wow, we're not selling enough tickets. Right? But there's no value in that. Managers don't want to hear that. Leadership doesn't want to hear that. They want to understand, what can we do to get you to sell tickets? What's the course of action? Is it marketing? You know, it certainly helps to have a good product on the field or the ice. But you need to have some type of answer. You know, this predictive analytics gets at the idea, do we think or do we know? Right? A lot of people think they know the answer, but digging through the data, building some models, getting some answers with the data really helps us kind of be much more confident in what we're trying to propose. So, you know, a lot of stuff that we do in my class, and I know when I came and spoke to this group, well, not you guys, but similar students, was that back in November? So one of the students in the class, he said, you know, I'm not really good at math. Is that a problem? Could I work in this space? Could I do this type of work? And I would tell you that it certainly helps to be numbers driven, and if you're comfortable working with numbers, it helps. But I can tell you there's been people that have learned it through hard work and they can do well. But there is a lot of numbers to think about, and it does help if you are kind of wired quantitatively. Did we lose something here?
I don't know.
There we go.
There you go.
So, right up here I make this statement here. When we talk about samples to populations, who can tell me what that means? Samples to populations. What does that infer there when we're talking about a sample and a population? How are those two things different? This gentleman, what's your name?
Rashad?
Rashad?
Yeah.
Okay, sample and populations, take a stab at it.
Well, when you do an analysis of a sample size, it's, I guess you use a ratio to transfer it to the population.
Yeah, good. So give me any study that you can think of in your head that you would want to try to get a sample of something and then make inferences to an entire population. What would you do?
Maybe if we were talking about sports, you would take a section of the stadium and
Yeah.
see their travel to the concessions, and then maybe transfer that to the whole stadium.
Bonus for him. That's perfect. Now, the only thing I would add to his answer, and I think you were getting at this, is when he said we need to take a section of the stadium or arena, but we probably need to take bits and pieces of each of the sections, right? Because if we only take a section that's up on the upper deck and get people's viewpoints up there, they may not be the same look. They may not look the same as people who sit in different other levels. But if we took 5 different sections of a stadium or arena, then it might make sense we could broaden our inferences to the entire population of people. So a lot of times when you go out and try to think about using data, it's virtually impossible to get an entire population. If I wanted to figure out what's the study habits of University of Tampa students, I can't go find all of, what do you guys have, 3,000 to 4,000 students here?
8.
Oh, okay, 8. Not even close. So there's 8,000 students. Well, who's got the time to really go figure out who among those 8,000 I'm going to get to fill out a survey, even if it's online? But maybe I go get 50 students or 75 students or 100 students that I think are representative of the entire UT population. Now that helps me make different kind of inferences. So good. That was a good answer. Okay, so look at that first word. If you take 2 or 3 things from tonight, I think that's something you should all think of. Be curious. Right? What does that mean? Dr. Jisha will tell you there's probably no one that he knows that asks more questions than I do. I do it today. I don't care who I meet, I will ask questions, whether it was in a classroom, if I go meet someone, just ask someone their story. You know, tell me your story, what are you about? By the way, all of you should have what your story looks like. Your 30-second speech. Say you're out somewhere, oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm a student at UT, I'm studying sport management, I'm looking to get a job. Maybe that person that you don't even know could be someone that could potentially help you get a job. What do you want to do? Better have a good answer. Clear, concise, know what you want to do, right? All things to kind of help you get yourself going in your careers. When you think about this, you know, a lot of times when we try to do some type of analytics, we do it on previous research. So it's oftentimes, if I was going to try to build on some marketing theory or financial model, I would look at what someone's done previously and kind of add to it. Maybe they looked at it with a sample of the NBA. So I could duplicate that. Maybe I want to look at something with the NFL, right? So I'm taking the same type of questions, but I'm using a different sample to study on. Okay, so it's interesting. A couple years ago, when I was up in, by the way, next week, assuming this, right now the plan is I'm going to fly out on Thursday to Boston. The weather may have something to say about that, as you can follow. They've got like 100 feet of snow up there, crazy. But Boston every year hosts a conference up at Sloan MIT, Sports Analytics Conference. Anybody have heard of that? If you haven't heard of it, the gentleman in the back's heard of it, I would tell you this. Google that. Go to the website. What's cool about that is they've got like 6 years of videos all online. You can watch them for nothing. I mean, if you want to learn about what's happening in the sport world, the business world, there's your answer. It's the best conference I've ever seen that brings practitioners and researchers and anyone else you can think of. Every professional team has 2 or 3 people there. Last year I was sitting there watching a session, and I'm sitting right towards the end of an aisle, and it's dark because they've got the stage up front. And all of a sudden this big tall presence comes walking in, and he sits right next to me, and I'm paying attention to the speakers. And I look over, it's Phil Jackson. It's kind of cool. You know, guy's been a pretty good successful coach, but he's just sitting right there because he was next in line to go talk. But it's an unbelievable, they draw us 3,000 people, there's a waiting list, but very, very cool. Now, most of you can't get there, that's why you come to our conference, right? And we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. But when I was up there last year, I was talking to people in the industry, and I said, what's missing? What are you looking for when you hire people? I ask that all the time when I go out and meet people that work in the sport business or the entertainment business. What are you looking for when you hire people? I want to know that we're training our students to be relevant and competitive. And he said, for the analytics jobs, there's 5 things that we look for when we're hiring people. And he said, we can't find 5 people. We can't find many people that have all these 5 skills. Some have these skills, some have these skills, and some have these skills, but it's hard to find someone that's got all 5. So the first one he says is, you got to get people to ask the right questions. If Dr. Jisha gives you some assignment to think about it as a research project, your first thing you got to think about is, what's the question you want to answer? All right, you got to start there. That needs to be your start, just asking the right questions. That's fairly simple. But as I go down the list, you'll see that these skill sets become tougher and tougher, fewer people have them. Number 2 is you got to be able to go out and collect the data. Now there's primary data and there's secondary data. Who in here can tell me, I'll just pick on someone, this young lady right here. What's your name?
Taryn.
Taryn? What do you guys do, by the way, when you're in a class and the professor wants to ask a question, he's going to call on you, what's the first thing all of you do? You don't want to be called on, so what do? You put your head down. You're right, you're busy. He won't call on me. So that's what she was doing. Didn't work. I've been doing this too long. So tell me, primary data, secondary data, do you have any idea how those are different?
Isn't primary data like the data you can go online and find out whatever you want to find out, and then secondary is you actually go and get your information, you do interviews, you do a survey, stuff like that.
You're on the right track, but you got to clean it up a little bit.
Okay.
Yep.
I thought it was the opposite way. I thought
Okay.
primary was
Okay.
actual like observing, going out, collecting it, and then secondary is what you can find that can help.
Yeah,
study.
you had it reversed a little bit, right? So primary data means that you go out and you collect it yourself. You go do the surveys. You call people on the phone. Secondary data is data that's already collected from someone else. Now, assuming that the source is legitimate, the big advantage with that, right? So think about when I did my dissertation a long time ago. This is when college athletic programs were starting to explode with money and finances and everything. So I wanted to figure out why certain college athletic programs were able to show profits and other ones were not. So I built these financial models, and as I thought about building them, I said, why would I go out and try to survey every school and get their data provided back to me when there's a website that has them already collected, right? So it was easy for me to use secondary data in that instance. It made more sense. Because obviously the more schools you have in your sample, your population, the stronger your statistics become. So, okay, so number 2, you got to collect the data. Number 3, you got to be able to model and statistically test the data. And you guys as undergrads, you're not going to have a big expectation to be able to do a lot of statistical stuff. I get that. Right? A lot of our students that come in our grad program, even though most of them have had business courses, their stats, it's just not there. They haven't learned it. They haven't used it. And statistics are like, it's like golf. If you don't go out and hit golf balls every day or play, your golf skills are going to erode. Same thing with statistics, right? If you don't use them all the time, it's just, they're complex. It's not easy to know how to apply them if you're not using them all the time. Number 4 is you got to be able to interpret the findings. There's a lot of people who are really smart being able to put the statistics up there, and then once they get the output, can't really figure out what it means. Right? Tell me the story. And then the 5th one is to communicate the results. So when I come and talk to you guys, I will present things on a different level than when I go to other conferences where I'm talking to a bunch of other boring professors. Right? I would frame my comments differently based on the audience. And that's something you got to think about. When you guys get out in your careers, you might get asked to give a presentation. You need to know who your audience is. All right? So think about those 5 skills. All right, let me talk about something that obviously I have a little bit of a passion about, and that's our program over at South Florida. But before I move into that, does anybody have questions about anything on analytics that I talked about? Questions you want to ask me about it? Yep.
How much of like a experience do you need, like say statistically wise, before you get to like say go on to like an internship for analytics?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I can tell you this: we over now, I get phone calls or emails from people that are looking to hire people in the analytics space, and they'll say, "Do you have 2 or 3 students you would recommend?" Obviously, I'm going to recommend the ones that I thought were really strong in my class. That helps. But some of them, they didn't have a lot of experience before they got in our program. But what they did do is over the course of their residency, they were working in analytics for almost a year. And that 1 year is really valuable when you go on the job market. So that's what I would really encourage all of you to, when you think about where you want to go do your internships. Well, you have a huge advantage in this program. Right? There are so many sport management programs across the country that are housed in locations that make no sense whatsoever. As good as schools as Florida and Florida State are, and I taught at both of them, Tampa's got a much bigger advantage in those 2 schools because of the location being here. There's so many more opportunities for you to get experience here. Think about this. If you're at Florida State and FSU, and again, I taught over 1,000 students there in the course of my time. So where are you going to work? Athletic department? Right? That's about it. There was 2 or 3 other small businesses in the community, but by and large, if you were going to stay local, there just wasn't that many opportunities. You have much bigger laboratory here that's available to you. Okay, so let me break down our program. I'll talk to you about some of what I think are the strengths, the features. And again, if you have questions about this, please feel free to jump in. Okay, so our program is full-time. We are right now interviewing students for next fall. Like on Monday, we've got 6 students coming in. We interview every student that we accept, except we had 1 student from China. We did a Skype interview with her. But everybody else, They pay their own way down to Tampa, they make it to our campus, and they go through an interview both with our current students and with our 4 faculty members. And how do we select who we interview? Well, we look at their video, we look at their GPA, and we look at their test score. So if any of you are thinking about grad school, I would tell you this, wherever you're looking to go, you probably ought to find out, now would be a good time, what test score they look at for their program. It's either probably going to be the GMAT or the GRE. We accept both. So it doesn't matter to me whichever test you want to take. They're a little bit different in terms of their content. If you think you can score better than one, that's the one that would make sense for you to take. But we accept both of those. So it's a 2-year program. The first year you get an MBA, and then the second year you get a master's degree. Now some of you might be sitting there saying, well, do I have to do both if you were to come into our program? The answer is no, you don't have to. But as I talk more about year 2, that traditionally is where a lot of the fun stuff happens. So I think students really want to be there for year 2. But we have had a couple students who got the MBA, they got a great job offer, and they left. One guy came over from China. He was an American, but he wanted to work in Japanese baseball, and came over from Japan, excuse me. Wanted to work in Japanese baseball, came over, got the MBA, made a couple contacts, went back there. He had a job offer. Made sense for him to go back. I'm realistic. As much as I think being in school is good for you and you should learn and broaden your skill set, it's also about getting jobs. And so when he came to me and said, what do you think I should do? I said, is this a job you want? Yep. Then you should take it, right? You may not be there in a year. The master's degree is probably not going to be that big difference maker if they already want you now with your MBA. So our program is structured for 2 years, and most people end up doing it for 2 years. All of you have probably heard this analogy, and it makes no sense when I keep hearing it over and over. But what does everybody tell you you should do as far as broadening your network? And no one uses a Rolodex, but you get the idea, your contacts. What are you supposed to do? It's not what you know, it's what? That's garbage. Right? It's who knows you. And that's a big difference. All of you might say, oh, I know the Glazers. Why? Because you read about them in the newspaper? But do they know you? Right? And I'm joking with you a little bit, but it's a big difference. Right? You need to know, they need to know you. I was sitting in Billy Donovan's office 3 or 4 years ago. It's not like we're great friends, but I know him a little bit from being up there at UF in basketball. And we're sitting there talking, and his secretary knocks on his door, and she said, Coach, I don't remember the guy's name, but so-and-so's on the line. He would like to have you give him a letter or a recommendation for a job. Says he knows you. And Billy Donovan looked at her, I have no idea who that is. And apparently this guy worked his basketball camp like 2 years ago and maybe said hello to him. That's not a big impression. Right? So you need to get out and continually be in front of people that can help you. So one of the things that we do, we just came back last month. We were out in LA for a week. We take students out there, we raise money to help them go out to LA, and we meet with 4 or 5 different, well, more than that, about 8 different sport organizations and entertainment organizations, ranging from the Dodgers to Legends. Anybody know what Legends does? Ever heard of Legends? Most people haven't. A lot of our students had no idea what Legends was before we took them out there. But Legends does the concessions for the Yankees and the Cowboys. And they're looking to expand to different teams as well to do some different type of marketing for them. The company's based in Dallas. It's a pretty successful company. The other thing I would tell you to do is broaden your scope of what you think you want to do. Because whatever you're good at, that job skill set is transferable. And whether you do it for the Lightning, the casino, or the Bucks, it's all the same stuff. Right? It's all the same stuff. Many people who work for sports or entertainment, they've been in one team or one organization, they just move around. But you got to be good at something. So when we were out in LA, we met with the Legends, we met with the Dodgers, we met with an agency, we met with Ticketmaster. The president of Ticketmaster came and spoke to our group. In fact, one of our students looks like he might get hired out there. And Ticketmaster, by the way, guys, you think about what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear Ticketmaster? You think of tickets, right? It's a technology company. They just happen to sell tickets. Right? But think of where they're located out in LA. They have such a competitive advantage because they're hiring the best and brightest from Stanford, from UCLA, from Cal Berkeley, right? I mean, it's all right there. And so I was talking to the guy, and he's like, yeah, we're just plucking talent left and right. And there was actually a fire drill going on while he was presenting to us. Can't make this up. We leave the building, we're walking back in the building, guy next to him, what's your story? Just like I told you to ask people. How long you worked here? He said, a week. You like it? He goes, yeah, I'm learning. And I said, where'd you come from? He said, I worked for CBS, but went to Cal Berkeley, majored in engineering. They recruited me over here to Ticketmaster. Went to Fox Sports, right? Fox's main headquarters is out in California, so we took our students there. They got to see the whole production side of what happens with TV. So that networking trip is pretty cool for us. Some of you may have come over in January. We had a speaker series where we had 4 speakers come talk on campus. It was open to the public. I know part of the challenge is, I know that's before you guys get back in school. So we're actually looking to change the date, possibly where it might allow some of you to be involved with that. But we had Michael Jordan's agent, David Falk, come talk. Just about the whole agent world, because as Dr. Jishua will tell you, I've been doing this 25 years, and I think I've had one student who's ever even sniffed thinking to go work as a sports agent, but that's what everybody wants to do when they come into this, right? Everybody wants to be a GM or an agent. Guys, I don't want to burst your bubble, but those aren't very prominent, those aren't easy to get jobs. Now, if you want to be on the business side of a team and be a team president, an executive, a vice president that oversees ticketing or marketing, that's doable. You can do that. But being the GM of the hockey team, Steve Eiserman's job, it's not coming out of here. Right? You need to play in the NHL for 10 or 12 years and be really good. So understand the job that you're looking to get, what it takes to get there. Be realistic with yourself. So I mentioned the analytics conference, and I would encourage all of you, if you're available, to come to this. It's April 9th and 10th. It's 5 minutes from here. It's right downtown at the Marriott. And actually, let me see if I can pull this up here. But this is our first year doing it. I have no idea how many people will make it, but I think we'll end up getting a couple hundred, if not more. Stuff, the X Games. And I've never met him. But just through doing some web searches, I found his name, I found his business, went online, watched him on YouTube. So this guy's pretty cool. I think he can bring a lot to our conference, so I invited him down. So, again, you can kind of spend some time looking at this on your own. But we're excited about what we have here as far as the people. By the way, this guy here, anybody know his story? High school football coach, Pulaski Academy in Arkansas. Never punts. Doesn't punt the ball. Doesn't believe in it. Does all the stats. Says it's goofy to punt the ball. No matter where he's on the field, he won't punt. And guys, he won the state championship this year. Again, he's won like 7 in the last 10 years. So very successful. I think he'll be really entertaining. So anyway, you can again spend some time on that if you want. But that I think will be really good for you. It's very inexpensive. We purposely kept the cost down. I think for non-USF students, it's like $50. Maybe if you're really nice to your professor, you guys could do some kind of fundraising thing where maybe the department would help pay for some of that for some of you to go, whatever, right? But I think you meet a lot of people there. You get a chance to see what's going on in the industry. Something to think about. All right, so this is kind of as an overlay of the 2 years in our program, but let me focus more. Well, first, let me back up. Why did we set the program up this way? One of the things that I think is a really strength of your program is you guys have to take a fair amount of business courses. And I know you may cringe on that, you may not like it, but I'm telling you that's what you need. There are way too many sport management programs across the country where students come out of there with no business acumen whatsoever, and it's very tough to go in the job market if you don't have that foundation. When I taught at Florida State and I was teaching master's level students, it was not a requirement, even though I tried to push it for years and it was a losing battle. But I tried constantly to get where the students had to have an undergraduate business degree to come in our grad program. Didn't work. So I'm sitting there teaching a course in finance, and 3/4 of my students at the grad level don't know what a financial statement looks like. When I talked about a balance sheet or an income statement, statement of cash flows, it was like, right? You have to have some grounding in business to be going into this field. So if you look at the first year of the MBA, that's where the courses are kind of geared as traditional MBA courses. And then in the second year, and what's kind of cool, the way we have the second year set up, is you are guaranteed to have a residency. So in year 2, you're guaranteed to be on the job for 20 hours a week. All our classes are on Tuesday and Thursday, so you're out there working Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and maybe nights and weekends as needed. So you work for 20, sometimes 30 hours a week, but you get tuition waiver and you get health insurance. So there's really no cost to you, theoretically, in year 2. And you'd say, well, how do I get to pick? How do your students select where they go work? So as soon as they arrive on campus in year 1, we spend time getting to know them. What do you want to do? What's your long-term goal? Where do you want to work? And once we figure that out, that's when we sit down with them and say, okay, maybe you need to go work here, or go work here, or go think about here. And so they might pick 3 of their top ones. They go interview with those different organizations. The organizations may call our faculty back and say, okay, I got Joe and Tammy here, who do you recommend? And I'll just give them my blunt assessment of what I think is the best candidate. Most of the time it works out where they either get their first or second choice. How many of you in here, by show of hands, have heard of a company called Feld? F-E-L-D. What do they do?
Entertainment. They like the Disney on Ice and
Yep.
Nuclear Cowboys and things like that.
It's a massive operation, guys. It's an international, global entertainment industry, and it's an hour south of here. They just relocated their headquarters. It's one of the biggest. It's the second biggest building under roof in the state of Florida, behind the Space Center. We've got a full-time one of our alums working down there. We've got students working down there in their residency. Unbelievable opportunity. Like she mentioned, they do Disney on Ice. They do all the Monster Jam truck pull stuff, right? I mean, they put probably 1/3 of the events that are at Amalie is their shows. They have people worldwide working in that industry. So you know, you don't think about that. People don't know about these opportunities, but they're out there. So in the residency, this is kind of what I was getting at. That's some of the advantages that students have going into the residency as far as what they're looking for. And how do you get into our program? These are some of the metrics that we look at. And like I said, that'd be another thing if you're thinking about grad school. And guys, I'm not pushing our program as the best. There's other very good programs out there. And you should figure out what makes the most sense for what you want to do. As Dr. Jisha mentioned, I would caution you to think about going to a program where there's only 1 or 2 faculty members. And what's their track record of placing students in jobs, right? You want to ask those types of questions at any school that you would go to find out, am I going to get a job when I leave here? Our dean, he's been there about the same time I have, about 2.5 years. High energy guy. He's got a goal. I think it's ambitious. I don't know if it's realistic, but he's going to work to get it. He wants every student that graduates from the College of Business to have a job upon graduation. That's tough. We were incredibly fortunate. Our first group of alums had 19 students. Every one of them got a job. Now the pressure's on us for year 2. We got 27 that are graduating in 2.5 months. 5 already employed full-time. Right? But we got a ways to go to get the rest of them working. You can kind of see, you know, where would you guys measure up? And again, this isn't just for our program, but this is pretty consistent with a lot of the grad programs. By the way, I think there's very little. I'm not a huge fan of letters of recommendation. I've been reading it for 20 years. I've never read a bad one. Joe's lazy. He's not a very good student. I mean, no one says that in a letter of recommendation. Now, if it's lukewarm, that tells me something, right? Like, wow, this is the best you could get to speak on your behalf. That's not a great endorsement. I'll pick up the phone and call, and like Dr. just said, our field is not that big. Between the 4 faculty members we have, one of us is probably going to know someone at another program across the country. And so it's easy to call and say, tell me about so-and-so. But if you look at our academic credentials of people coming in, almost a 3.5 GPA and a pretty good GMAT score. That's the average. We take a few that are below 500, but by and large, that's kind of the benchmark that we look for. Okay, so these are some of our partners that we have. I mentioned some of these already. By the way, see this one down here? Ironman. It's 10 minutes from here. Corporate headquarters. Not just like a regional, corporate headquarters. One of my former students at Florida State, I knew he was good. He was a student I would have bought stock in. Right? I had him in a student 8 years ago. And I'll tell you a cool story about this. So, about 3 years ago, right around the same time, when USF was starting their program, and it looked like I was going to be involved, potentially interviewing here, I came down and I called him up and I took him to lunch. And we're having lunch right over where he works, and I was telling him what you do, and he's telling me, it's so cool. I get the most satisfaction of what I do in my job is seeing students go out and be successful. And I think Dr. Jisha would tell you that's why we do this. It's not the money. None of us are getting rich doing this, but it's the, hey, students are successful, making a difference, they're out working, that's what's cool. That's what's cool for me. So I take him to lunch, and we're talking, and he says, Dr. Mondello, did you hear that they're starting a program over at USF? And in my mind, I've got an interview scheduled the following week, but I don't tell him that. I just want him to kind of tell me what he knows about it. And he goes, man, I think you'd really like to go into that program. I said, yeah, it sounds pretty good. He goes, yeah, it's been in the newspaper, and I've heard about it. And so a couple weeks later, I called him back, and I said, hey, I'm seeing you more often. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, I'm coming down there. So, but he works over at Ironman. He's probably 28, 29. Been promoted there twice already. He's like in charge of like global marketing for Ironman. I'm telling you, and I knew it when I sat him in class. And it wasn't like his test scores, right? It wasn't his test scores. It was just how he carried himself and his drive. Whatever he asked me to do, he followed up with it. I didn't have to check on it. And that's not a mystery why he's successful. He works. He's been really good at what he does. How about this company right here, Majestic? Who can tell me what they do? Apparel. Yeah, right? They're like the largest apparel for sports. They're headquartered right here. They make all the baseball uniforms. Right? We have a student working over there. Fox Sports Florida, big partner of ours. They help put on the speaker series that we do. One of the things that they also do that's pretty cool is they do what's called a Fox Sports University, where they will come down and they will give our students a project to work on, and the students then have 3 months to figure out a solution for it. Last year, the problem that they were given was, how do we get more people to watch the Rays? Right? One is Trey Peralta, because he's slow, and they did that. But the reality was, the Rays obviously need to be drawing more fans there, but they also don't do a good job getting your age group demographics to watch TV. You guys don't watch the Rays at all. So our students were given the task of figure out a way to market more so younger demographics watch the Rays on TV. And what's pretty cool is each team then presented back to Fox Sports, and then the Rays management invited us over, and they invited us to a game, but before the game we were up there meeting with senior staff, presenting our ideas back to them. And the team that won is actually going to have their idea made into a commercial. So you'll probably see it run coming up this year. So Fox Sports is a great partner of ours. USF Athletics, I mean, if you guys want to work in college sports, I'm sure Dr. Jisha has his contacts. You should be involved with UT Athletics. Right? We have about 6 students working over in our athletic department right now, getting all kind of experience for marketing, facilities, whatever needs to be done, they're working over in athletics. The WTA, Women's Tennis Association, headquartered right over in St. Pete. All of our partners up here, with the exception of a couple on that map, they're all within an hour distance of Tampa. We have to have about an hour drive because we're not going to ask students to drive 4 hours somewhere and coming back and forth. It wouldn't make sense, right? So most of these partners, Chase Bank is a financial sponsor as well as the Golden State Warriors. So anyway, that's a little bit about, and this is what I just mentioned this about Fox Sports U. So really pretty cool when you see your ideas get put into fruition. This is a map that shows you where our first group of alums ended up getting jobs. Obviously there's a high concentration in Florida. That's for two reasons. One is our first group, a lot of these students were selected before we got down here, and a lot of them were from Florida because there was nothing in place to interview people. They were kind of, hey, here's your first group of students. But now we've got students that are much more diverse in terms of geographics, where they come from. This guy out here, AEG, named Matt Schick, probably did more than any student I saw in our first group of students as far as networking himself. He just worked, made contacts. His residency was working down at the Lightning, working under guest services, and he did parking. Doesn't sound glamorous, but you know what he did? Like 2 months into his internship, he came to me and said, hey, I got an idea, let me bounce this off you. He comes in and he said, can you help me with this? I said, sure. And so we built some revenue models based on their current parking schemes. He took it back to the Lightning, they implemented it, they're doing it right now. That's kind of cool, right? There's value there. So he goes out, he interviews on the job market. Well, what have you done? What did you do at your residency? Well, I came up with a new parking scheme for the Lightning schematically, and they're using it right now. So he works for a company called AEG. It's one of the biggest entertainment industries out in California. And when we were out in LA, it was pretty cool. He came and saw our students and kind of talked about how his first year on the job has been. But guys, you got to be realistic about salary too, right? What you think you're going to make, how much money you think you're going to make if you want to work in sport. And I will tell you this, and I'm sure every one of your faculty members here has told you this. When you go interview for an internship or a job, and the person across the table says to you, what's your name?
Hey, Austin.
Austin? Okay, Austin. Where do you think you want to work in 5 years? What's realistic? What do you want to be doing in 5 years?
Basketball?
Yeah.
Running events somewhere.
What kind of events?
Sporting events.
Participatory or pro or what?
Don't know yet.
Okay, so let's say you want to run 5K races. I'm just making this up. That's maybe not what you want to do. But you go meet a guy, one of our students, that's what he's doing, by the way. Started his own business. Races around town. His dad used to work over at Disney, did all the Run Disney stuff, and now he and his dad partnered up, and they're creating their own business. Well, let's say you want to put on 5K races. And so you're interviewing with me, I'm the director, I'm looking for someone to kind of take some of the load away. Okay, Austin, why do you want to come work for me? What's your answer?
So I can be an asset and good work ethic and.
Okay, that's not a bad answer. What you don't say is I love sports. And 2/3 of the people that get their first interview, that's what they say. And you know who gets out of that group who gets hired? Nobody. Don't say that. There's an assumption if you go interview for the PGA Tour or the Lightning that you like sports. But guys, you got to separate the two. You're no longer a fan. Right? You can't be working for the Lightning and Steven Stamkos walks by in pregame and you're supposed to be sitting at the facility and you go over and start watching practice. You won't be watching it long. You have to separate those things out. Right? His answer was a good starting point. Show how you can create value to that organization. If I was going to go interview for, it doesn't matter, you could give me the company. If I knew I had an interview next week, there'd be about 5 or 6 things I would do on my own research to prepare myself for that interview. You're going to get asked a bunch of questions, but I can tell you what, a lot of people that are hiring, and I do the same thing, I want to know what questions I get asked back. I can tell that by the depth of someone's questions how much they put into this. And that's a big thing. People look at that. Okay, so I talked about this. Again, you're all welcome. We'd love to have you there if you can make it. It's 2 days. It's a Thursday, Friday. All the information is on that website about how to go out and register and so forth. Okay, let me talk about some tips to success. And I've kind of hit on these already, and then I'll open it up for any questions that you have. Build your network. It starts as soon as you get on the campus here, right? Every week you should have a goal in mind of meeting 2 or 3 people that could help you along your career. Think about that. They're here for 4 years. Let's just say you're in this program and you're really concentrating for 2 years. That's it. You do the math, right? 2 people a week, that's a lot of people that you could meet. And they're all out there. And I'll tell you this, guys, I've been doing this a long time. If you're polite, you're professional, you can get in front of a lot of people by just being courteous and persistent. Pick up the phone. Go meet someone. Write them a letter. Nobody gets letters anymore, right? Everything that comes to my house, it's junk, bills. I don't want to see that. I know how much I pay my lawn guy. I don't want to see that. But you write someone a letter. You say, you know what, Joe Smith over at NASCAR, whatever it is, I really want to do what you want to do. Can I come talk to you at your convenience? And you know what? 80% of the time, you'll get in front of these people. Now, the other thing you do after you leave that 10 or 20 minutes that you have with them is you write them a thank you note. Again, same thing, you handwrite them a note. Most people don't do that. I talked about being curious. Find a mentor. Huge. One of the things we do in our program is we give every student a professional mentor, and then we also assign a second-year student to mentor a first-year student to kind of get them through the ropes. Because it's tough. Academically, they're busy. We get them a professional mentor in whatever they identify as where they want to go work, and that person interacts with them on a frequent basis. That's kind of set up on an individual basis. When I talk about passion, be enthusiastic, whatever it is, but don't say the love of sports. You've got to get beyond that. When we interview students for our grad program, and I look at their statement, and I see the first line is, I've loved sports as a kid and I still do, it's not a good starting point. And I tease that out in an interview. I want them to think beyond that. I want them to think about the business aspect of what we're trying to teach and how they can be effective for an organization. Okay, last thing, and then I'll open up for any questions you have. Guys, I'm not looking for a job. I got the best job in the world. I couldn't script a better job for me. But I came over here out of respect because I like what Dr. Jisha and his other staff are doing here. I think this is a good program. I go visit other schools. I come in, I look professional, right? Dress for the job that you want to have. It matters. It matters, right? It's a big deal. Number 2, volunteer. 1, you should always give back to your community anyway, but I can't tell you how many things I volunteered for as an undergraduate student, even as a grad student. We have a golf tournament that we put on next week that I've been. It's kind of under my watch. It's a fundraiser for our program, and all of our students that are getting ready to graduate come out and they volunteer because 1, it's important for the people playing the tournament to see where that money is going to, but they should be volunteering anyway. We tell all of our students to get as much volunteer as you can. If you think about sports organizations that are notorious for taking out of the community, right? If some of you are probably familiar with what Mr. Vinnick does over at the Lightning, he gives away $50,000 every home game to a nonprofit to use to create goodwill. I mean, think about how tough it is to sell hockey in Tampa, in Florida, right? The Panthers down south, go to one of their games. Take a bunch of hockey pucks and throw them around the arena. You won't hit anybody. No one there. But you go to the Emily, it's 90% full. And a lot of his goodwill that he's built up in Tampa, I think fans appreciate that. They give back to him because he's philanthropic. So volunteer. Over-deliver. I don't care if it's a classroom, an assignment, your professor asks you to do something. Over-deliver. Do more than you're asked. You know, what's going to separate you at the end of the day? I mean, you got a chance to hear me talk. That's probably not going to get you a job. Maybe something I said to you sticks, but what are you doing to put yourself out there to be marketable? That's huge. You know? And don't look around the room, guys, and say, man, if this is my competition, I can outwork this group, or I can it's all over the country. What sport or entertainment organization do you see hanging out a shingle saying help wanted? Not many, right? You're competing against people coming out of graduate programs, Ivy League schools, right? Talented people. So you got to think of what are you doing to differentiate? And then the last thing, and I almost didn't want to put it last because it's almost like the most important thing that I think I've given you tonight, is be nice. Be polite. Most of the people that are successful in the world, you know, it's like, how many of you played high school sports? Large majority of you, right? Some of you, you know, and maybe some of you still had one of those coaches that was just a screamer, right? Just got in your face no matter what you did. You know, that works for some people, but by and large, you look at leaders today, they're not tyrants. They're just nice people. And so, think about that as you go and work for different organizations. I mean, all of us come to work. You don't want to work with people you don't like, that aren't nice. Warren Buffett, any of you heard of Warren Buffett? He's like a big investor, lives in Omaha. He said something that resonated with me. I saw when he talked a couple years ago. He said, you know, you got to have a technical skill set. You got to be educated. You got to have some common sense. He goes, but you know what? He goes, most people that you want to aspire to be, and if you look at their qualities, think of it, if I told you to write down the 5 or 6 qualities of a person you really admire, that you really know, most of what you would write down you could do yourself. You could learn it yourself. It's not this wow factor of some hidden talent that people have. It just isn't. So, be nice. Okay, now that I've bored you with PowerPoint, what questions do you have about anything I talked about?
You talked about, like, I think number 4 was the data basically is the star of the show. How often is, like, the data, like, when they understand the data and they read the data and they make a decision on that, how often do those plans get reverted back to, like, okay, we've made a mistake, we need to come up with something different, the data we've read was wrong?
Okay, so I heard your question. I paused. Okay, so you said when the person digs into the data and they find out it's wrong?
Well, I'm saying, like, they make an executive decision based on the data. How often times does that get, I guess, recycled back into the data being like who oversees the data, and do they make a group decision, or is it like more like the heads, or like who makes the decision on the data?
It's a good question, right? So in the class that I teach, I have 2 full-time members of the Lightning staff. They'll come in and guest lecture on topics that they're doing down at the Lightning. So one guy is in charge of business strategy for the Lightning. So a lot of times it's on him and one other guy. So the president of the Lightning might come down and say, you know, I need you to run some projections on what our playoff ticket prices might look like based on supply, demand, other things. So basically it's on him, you know, and so it helps if you've got 1 or 2 people to kind of bounce that off. But a lot of times, like the Orlando Magic, they've got like 7 full-time people dedicated to analytics. But that's a rarity, right? And I can tell you what, guys, some of you may have seen last week, I think it was, quiet, humble Charles Barkley made a comment about analytics. He thinks analytics has no value. And he's talking about it on the player side, right? He's talking about these people who try to use all the, like every camera in the NBA, every arena in the NBA has cameras mounted up top where it literally captures thousands of data points every game of the players and their movements and where they are and how many passes. And I think a little bit it gets, I agree with him. I think some of it's overblown. But I think analytics has a real value on the business side for a team. And so it just depends on how big your staff is. The good thing is, guys, like, I'm not the brightest guy, but I'll work. And so if something comes across my desk that I don't understand, Google it. Right? YouTube. I'm not knocking YouTube. There are so many good videos on YouTube about how to do anything. I mean, go in there and type something on stats that you want to learn, a basic statistical model. And right there on YouTube, you can find good demonstrations of how to do it. I mean, you can teach yourself a lot of stuff. I mean, the resources you have available to you today as college students are unbelievable. Now, I will tell you this, not everything on the internet has great value. You got to be smart enough to figure that out, but you got so much stuff available to you. I don't think I'd ever go to the library if I was a college student. Not that I went there much when I was one anyway, because you didn't have to. Everything's electronic nowadays, right? But be resourceful. Use your resources. You know, when I was out talking with David Falk before he went out on stage, I was just talking backstage with him. And it was just interesting, his perspective on things. And he said, you know, it's a real tough business versus when I got into it 40 years ago. It's way different. You know, people just, it's just different. You know, the athletes are different, teams are different. You're dealing, it's not one-on-one with people, it's whole groups of people that you got to work with. It's just different. And a lot of you might think about what you want to do for your careers. And if I said to you, have you ever gone out and actually watched someone do what you want to do? Most of you would say no. And that's okay, because I think that's common. That's not pretty common. But figure out what job you want, and then go find someone who does it, and figure out, do I really want to do this? Sometimes you got to go do something that you don't want to do to figure it out. You know, when I was, I've been fortunate to teach overseas when I was at Florida State, and we would go out to, in London, right? You know, London has got the business district like you would see on Wall Street equivalent in New York. And we used to take it's called the Tube, around to different places in London. And we'd be going out to dinner or a show, and you'd see the people that were getting on the stop who had been working what was on the equivalent of Wall Street for 10 hours. And this is before, like, people were like, I wouldn't take pictures of these people anyway because I don't care about them. I mean, I care about them, but I don't want to take pictures of them. But it was just interesting looking at their, you know, they just look beat up. You know, that's a grind. You can do that for 3 or 4 years, and then it just spits you out. And so you got to figure out what you want to do. I also tell you this, never take a job because of money. Now think about what that says. And I'm talking on both ends of the spectrum. When I was in grad school at Florida, I wanted to coach. I thought I wanted to coach, so I was the assistant basketball coach at Santa Fe Community College in Gainesville. I got paid $3,750. Did it for 4 years. In the second year, I said, I put a lot of time in because I was doing scouting, recruiting, coaching, conditioning, study hall, all of it. So I started logging how many hours I was working. I made like 40 cents an hour. That was before taxes. Right? I mean, but I didn't care because that's what I wanted to do. Now, you know, I wasn't eating out much and, you know, sacrifices you make, but what I thought I had to do, you know. So, what other questions do you have? How many of you are thinking about grad school? I heard Dr. Gisher's answer, and I agree with it. I think if you want to go to grad school, there's no path that is better than the other. I think some of our students come into our program, and they've gone straight from undergrad, and we've had some students who go out and work for 3 or 4 years, and then come into our program. And it's nice to have that blend because it differentiates some of the discussions in class. I will tell you that once you graduate and you go out and work, and you start getting paid, it's awfully hard to give that up. That's difficult. So you got to decide what makes the most sense for you. I'm also here to tell you guys, I ask people this all the time when I go out and travel, and I say, when you're hiring people, how much does a master's degree or a graduate degree matter when you hire people? And they said, all things being equal, we like people with advanced degrees, but that's assuming that their experiences are relatively similar. So what I'm telling you is, if we had a student that went through, like at Florida State, if they came through our master's program and they didn't have any internships while they were working on their master's degree, and you guys came out of an undergraduate program with 4 good internships, you're far more marketable than they are. What have you done, right? You can sit there and tell me you've learned it in the classroom, but have you tried to apply any of this? Have you done anything of that? Right? That's important. What else? Yep.
In your research, have you seen a correlation between the bad teams, say in the NFL, like a team like the Bucks, and a good team like the Packers, their use of analytics? I mean, does it differ, or do they pretty much do they spend the same amount of time using them?
You know, I think that 10 years ago teams could get a little bit of advantage with it, but everybody's doing it now. I don't think there's virtually, everybody shares it, you know, there's no secret to it anymore. I will tell you this, one of the things I did a few years ago, because I was kind of interested in this, I looked at the NFL, and I wanted to see what made the most sense on how you allocated your payroll, right? Because in the NFL, you have a salary cap. Everybody understand what a salary cap means. It means you have a threshold for how much you can spend on your player's salary. So I was interested to find out, did it matter on how you allocated your resources for an NFL team? In other words, if you're, and it doesn't matter what the numbers, but let's just pretend it's $100 million for the salary cap. Does it make sense to pay $20 million to one player, or are you better off, you know, dividing it up into bigger chunks across your roster? And what we found was, it didn't seem to matter too much on how you allocated your money, but there were certain factors such as if you had a star player defined by different metrics, that seemed to help attendance. Didn't necessarily always help winning, but it drove your ticket revenues up, right? But, you know, the analytics side of the players now, it's, you know, baseball doesn't have a salary cap, so teams can spend ridiculous amounts of money, but, you know, there's, again, it's not a clear linear relationship to how much you spend in team success. I mean, the Rays have been unbelievably successful the last 10 years with their payroll they've had, right? I mean, their payroll is always in the bottom 1/3 of the league, and yet their wins and losses are like in the top quartile. So it's no right or wrong answer on that.
How many students apply and how many are accepted into the program?
Well, we typically get probably 80 applications. I would say of those 80, we probably try to interview 40 to 50 of them. And of those 50, we want to take somewhere between 25 and 30. Because each one has to have a residency, and so we don't want to take 40 students because we can't place 40 students. So there's two factors. There's an input of they got to get a residency, and then we got to get them jobs when they graduate. But I would say 80 is the number we get. We probably interview 50. We probably take 25 to 30. And you say, well, okay, how do you pick your students? The interview matters. I mean, we interview them, and our students give us feedback. We look at the test score. We look at their GPA. But I'll tell you this: I was an average test taker. You know, standardized tests, high school SAT, graduate. I was about average. And so I'm glad that's not the only metric that we look at. I can tell you I've had students who got ridiculous GMAT scores, like in the top 20%, 10%, but they're lazy. Some of them have been lazy. And so there's no ball of wax to say this is what the ideal candidate looks like. And there's been other students who came in with, you know, average test scores, pretty good GPAs, but people really backed them up and said this person will get it done, and most of the time we trust people. If Dr. Jisha called me up and said, hey, I got a really good student, think they'd be good for your program, I trust his judgment. I still interview him, right? But because we do that with everybody. So think about the impression you make on your professors while you're in here. Think about the impression you make on me. Think about a year from now, if you're sitting or 2 years from now, you're sitting in our office and say, hey, I met you when you came and spoke in Tampa. I actually paid attention to what you said. What else? Got time for one or two more. Yep.
Do you think that it'll be a necessity in like 10 to 15 years to have a MBA if you want to be like a top level executive for a professional sports team?
So here's how I would answer that. I don't know. I don't know. I will say I think more and more teams are going to look to promote people with graduate degrees. But a lot of it depends on what happens with the people who are hiring. Because we've been doing this a long time, but we're now starting to see some of my students that I graduated 10, 12 years ago are now in those upper managerial positions. And so they value the sport business degree. Prior to that, people may not have valued it as high, so people didn't get those opportunities to get interviewed. I would not say that the MBA or the master's degree is the clearest path to that. I think it's mixed. I do. I think there will be a lot of people who get... Todd Lywicki? Anybody know who he is? Who is he?
He's like the CEO, right?
He's Jeff Vinnick's right-hand man. Used to be the president of the Lightning. Now he's like the alternate governor. He's got equity stake in the ownership of the Lightning. He's one of the top 10 sports people I've met in the country. He was out in Seattle. He hired Pete Carroll. He started he built the whole soccer craze out there, the Sounders. I mean, it was all his marketing. He was behind the marketing of the 12th man in Seattle. And now he's down here with the Lightning. Doesn't have a college degree. What more do you want me to tell you? But he's got unbelievable people skills. You talk to him for 5 minutes and you leave there and you feel like he really cares about you. And he's just good. I mean, you don't get to that level with just fooling people. So, you know, but he's an anomaly. There's not many people like that don't even have a college degree, but he did it. Jeremy Foley. That name ring a bell to anybody in here?
Director for Florida.
Athletic director at Florida. Right? I know him a little bit. When he was a student at Ohio University, one of our peer schools, he got an internship in 1976 in the ticket office at Florida. He hadn't left. Just worked his way up. Florida got on probation. They fired this guy. He moved up. They fired this guy. He moved up. I mean, a lot of things happen, but he's not telling anybody to do anything he didn't do. Right? So there's ways to make it. There's no recipe for one way to do everything, you know. But I will tell you, it's competitive. It's fun. It's a great industry to get into. But you know, you got to find out what's your fit, what's your niche, what are you good at. And not everybody's good at certain things. I mean, analytics. Not every one of my students has any interest at all in going to work in analytics. I know that. But I think they ought to understand what it's about. You know, if you go work for a sports organization, you ought to understand what do the other departments do? What does marketing do? What does activation do? What does facilities? Because ultimately you're working together. You need to understand what goes on in those other meetings. And at some point you might go work in those areas. All right, one more question if you have it. Well, we got time for one more.
Well, I'll ask you, Dan, if they're going to be shy.
Yeah.
In this class, they have to do some of the things that you've talked about. They have to do some advice interviews, find somebody that they want to do. A lot of the things that you've talked about, worked on their resumes, a lot of the types of things that you've talked about. But could you maybe mention one of the things that I also have asked them to do, and maybe talk to the value of this, and you kind of hit on it with the analytics conference, but what about like joining the profession and being a part of going to conferences and professional organizations? And it's something, when I mentioned it to students, I don't seem to get a ton of buy-in on it just by the response. And because I think a lot of them have never really done it. They've heard about the winter meetings in baseball, but what is kind of your take on the importance of, and just how popular that is amongst people in the field, and how important it is to go see people in the field and be a part of it and to have those opportunities? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think the way I would answer that is, again, it's all about expanding your network and your contacts. But I would tell you this, like when I go up to this conference in Boston next week, I'm not looking for a job. But I've already probably sent 10 or 15 emails to people who I know are going there. Hey, you're going to be in Boston next week? Let's get together and say hello. Let's make sure we network while we're up there. And so you need to plan this out before you go. If you think, I'm going to go to the baseball winter meetings because I want to work for the Giants, and you're just going to show up in the hotel lobby and have your resume ready and people are going to like you, no. I mean, they might like you. But you need to have a purpose for going there. Who are you going to talk to? It needs to be done. There needs to be some legwork done on the front end.
I guess another way to ask that would be, I know a lot of my students, and we've talked about this in my class, that when they talk about their network, they say, I've met somebody. It's kind of almost like that Billy Donovan story.
Yeah.
How can they really take somebody that they've met, maybe briefly or something, and how can they build on that relationship? Because I have a lot of students say, well, I've got a guy, or my parents know a guy, so how do we take that from that kind of casual relationship, how do they build upon that? in
Yeah,
your
so
opinion?
I think one way I would give you a piece of advice on that is guys, relationships take work. It's not a one and done, right? So just because you go meet someone and they might say, hey, you know, Steve, it was great to meet you. Good luck in your studies at UT. If I can ever help you. And you know why a lot of people say that? I offer that to people all the time. If I can ever be of help to you, don't hesitate to ask, because 95% of people, they don't want to ask anything. So when you go meet someone, you go work an event, you go to an event, you're always on. I think that's the way I would always tell you. You're always on. You know, you're interviewing every day. And so when you meet people on the UT campus, you meet your classmates. You know, let me tell you a quick story, then we'll stop because I'm getting hungry, and Dr. Jisha knows if I don't eat, I start passing out. So, Rick Pitino, most of you heard of him, coaches at Louisville, pretty successful basketball coach. And guys, I'm using some examples from basketball because that's where I knew people from. But the message is bigger than basketball. So when he got the job at Providence, back in the mid-'80s, Providence was not very good. And so his first team meeting, he walks in the room and he says, okay, guys, we need 3 things for us to be successful here. And he said, 1, he writes them up on the board. He writes, grades, hard work, and family. He says, we need these 3 things to be successful here. And he said, okay, I looked at your GPAs and transcripts, and he erases it. Not here. And then he said, hard work. You guys think you're a hard worker? And a couple hands go up. How many of you guys have been in the gym or the weight room every day since the off season? Not one hand went up. He erased it. So there was a guy named Billy Donovan sitting in that meeting. And there was another guy named Delray Brooks who was in that meeting. And Delray Brooks puts his hand up and says, Coach, we got you. We're a close-knit family. We really care about each other. Okay. So he says to Billy Donovan, hey, Billy, what's Delray's brother do? What's his mom do? How many brothers and sisters has Jim? I mean, you could get the idea. They didn't know each other. So my advice to you is you need to get to know people. Like, how many of you have made an impression on me where if I leave here tonight and I can differentiate you a year from today? A couple of you asked questions. I get it's only an hour or 2 hours. It's hard to do that. But when you meet someone, you got to keep that relationship going. I mean, Dr. Jisha, you know, we just never lost contact over 15 years. I mean, there's been months where we don't talk. Now that we're in Tampa, we see each other more. But I always kind of knew what he was doing. Your other faculty member, Dr. Smucker, same thing. He was one of my. He was at FSU when I was there, and you know, I've known him for a long time. And so you build relationships with people. And so I think that's what you got to do, is you got to keep those relationships going, because it's a domino effect. Right now, all of your contact list is like this, and you got to broaden it, and you got to broaden your vision of what you want to do. We have a lot of students that come in our program, and they're just like right down this lane. That's what I want to do, and that's okay. But then all of a sudden, they take a class in something else, or they meet someone and say, "Wow, be open to that stuff." There's a lot of jobs out there that you can do and be successful, and it's probably, I can tell you this, if every one of you wrote down what you'll be doing in 5 years, 90% of you won't be right. You won't. Now, you might say, oh, I'm going to be 23. Well, okay. Or whatever age you'll be. But you won't be doing what you think you'll be doing. It just doesn't work out that way. It's very rare. But that's okay, because hopefully you'll be doing something that you like and you're good at. But you got to continue to make relationships. When you go volunteer, if you meet 5 or 6 people of significance, and I'm talking about the people that are the decision makers in the organization, that's what you need to do. You know, if I was a student at UT, I guarantee I'd have a job when I graduated here. No question. Because in this city, it's a playground for sports and entertainment. You can go meet anybody you want. And if you're professional and kind, nice people, that's the recipe. And you know, they may not hire you, but they can pick up the phone and say, hey, this sharp person here, you need to hire him. That's how jobs are getting. Again, most of the students that we place, it's through our contacts calling us up saying, hey, you got someone who can do this? got somebody who can do marketing, you got somebody who can, and then we look at our students. No, it's not hard. I mean, it's hard because most people don't want to do it. But if you work at it, make yourself marketable, you'll be successful. You'll do what you want to do. You got to figure that out, though. So, thanks for your time. I enjoyed visiting with you, and hopefully I'll see you some in April at our conference and down the road.